Right, so our third snippet for this week is going to be a quick one that looks at the final evisceration of Black political and legal equality in the latter part of the 19th century. So the beginning point here is, Grant serves his 2 terms, does not run for re-election in 1876. There's this contested election in 1876 where there's one electoral vote in Oregon, plus the electoral votes of Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina that are contested by each of the parties. And the Democratic argument is, look, our nominee, Samuel Tilden, the governor of New York, got the most popular votes. We believe that he got the most electoral votes in these southern states, most popular votes in these southern states. All of these electors should go to us. The Republican counter to this, which I think is the correct one, although they don't really press it as hard as they could have, was that there's an atmosphere of political violence throughout the South, that Black Republican voters are being intimidated to vote, that there's quite massive vote fraud in the counting of the votes, and that really it's Republicans who had won. On a technicality, I think the Tilden people probably were correct. The people who actually voted in 1876 probably voted for Tilden, but beyond that, the Republican argument was clearly correct. This is not in the South. It's not a free and fair election in 1876. At the end result, these 3 Southern states appoint 2 separate slates of electors. There's a commission that is created, and the result is a compromise. And the compromise is that Hayes, the Republican, is seated, but the promise is that federal troops will be pulled out of the South and that there really will be no more aggressive enforcement of civil rights principles by the federal government in the South. And the result you can kind of see from this chart is that the Republican Party, which is in red on this chart, essentially collapses both in the border states and in the states of the former Confederacy, so that we get this pattern where the South is becoming a one-party region. Along with this is the gradual and then beginning in the 1890s rapid effort to remove African Americans from voting. So this is a chart. It shows the number of African Americans in each of these former Confederate states. So we're more than 7 million, around 38% of the South. But in all of the southern states, there are laws passed beginning in Florida in the 1880s, ending with Alabama and Texas in 1901, that have the effect of eliminating the rights of African Americans to vote. So, like in a state like Louisiana, once the voter suppression laws have been passed, they'll be down to around 1,000. So pre-suppression, there were around 400,000 of the 652,000 African Americans who live in Louisiana. Around 400,000 of them were registered to vote. After these voter suppression laws, which were poll taxes or grandfather taxes or literacy tests for voters, where whites and blacks would be judged, in different ways, they were down to around 1,000. So that's from 400,000 to 1,000 in Louisiana, and there were comparable declines throughout the South. So for all practical purposes, by 1900, in the South, if you're African American, you can't participate in the political process. All of the southern states also enact a series of laws, sometimes statutes, sometimes they include it in the Constitution, which come to be called Jim Crow statutes. This is the wave of Jim Crow laws usually runs from 1890 to the early 1900s. So these are examples from Mississippi: a ban on interracial marriage, a requirement for separate schools between blacks and whites, a punishment for advocating on behalf of racial equality at all. Other states pass laws like Louisiana's law that requires all transportation, so trains, carriages, to be racially segregated. So there'll be a black car and a white car, and of course it's never separate but equal because the black facilities are far inferior to the white facilities. And then all of this is also accompanied by a dramatic rise in political violence. The era from 1889 until the end of World War I is the sort of high point of lynchings in the United States. As you can see, there are some white people who are lynched as well. So lynching is not an exclusively racial crime of whites against blacks, but the purpose here is to publicly kill in a way to send a message to African Americans to intimidate them from participating in the political system. Now, this regime, this Jim Crow regime, is challenged in court. It yields, it gets to the court in 1896 in one of the most infamous decisions in the history of the court, Plessy versus Ferguson. The court, by an 8-1 margin, upholds this Louisiana law that required segregation in rail cars, and basically says the 14th Amendment. It talks about equality, but it doesn't really mean what it says. It could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based upon color. That's exactly what the 14th Amendment was intended to do. And the court, the 8-person majority in the court, says that these Southern segregationist legislatures are at liberty to enact laws that uphold the customs and traditions of the people. And of course, the customs and traditions of these people are racism. And so, in effect, what Plessy does is to bless a system of apartheid, just legal distinction on the basis of race throughout the public code throughout the South. There's one justice that votes against Plessy versus Ferguson, Justice Harlan. This is the quote from his dissent, and the two. The Harlan dissent is extraordinarily powerful dissent. The two key lines I have bolded here in red. Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law. This is known as an anti-caste principle. So the idea that a law that basically says we're going to identify a group of Americans solely on the basis of their race or their ethnicity, and we're going to assign them as suppressed in the law, that's automatically unconstitutional. And then Harlan concludes by predicting correctly that the decision will be seen as pernicious as the Dred Scott decision. So the basic thrust here is that there's a series of political moves to disenfranchise African Americans throughout the South, and the court, in Plessy, basically tells Southern state governments that they're okay to do it.